The French President Emmanual Macron has called an emergency meeting following rioting and protests that have left 2 people dead in New Caledonia. The civil unrest in the French territory has been sparked by controversial changes to the voting system. So the move looks to allow French citizens who've lived in the territory for more than 10 years to vote in local elections. And leaders from the Indigenous population, known as the Kanak people, say that move could weaken their representation. Natacha Butler is joining us from Paris on this story. So, Natacha, any more reaction from the French government to these developments?
Well, as you mentioned there, the French President Emmanuel Macron has called for calm. He said that some of the violence that was seen in New Caledonia over the past 2 nights is absolutely unacceptable. And we know that he's meeting with ministers now in a special defence meeting at the Elysee to discuss the situation. We've also heard from the French Interior Minister also condemning the violence and giving us a bit more about the situation on the ground. We know, for example, that 2 people have been killed. The circumstances in which they died, we're not sure of, though. We know that shots were fired at police officers as these protests and the unrest spread. Vehicles and buildings were torched. Local authorities there in New Caledonia have decided to keep some schools shut. The airport, in which allowing flights in and out of New Caledonia, has also been shut as authorities try to quell the unrest. And what we also know is that a curfew that was put in place last night, it was supposed to, of course, to try and stop some of this violence spreading. That curfew has actually been extended until Thursday. So French authorities are certainly hoping that the situation will be quieter this evening.
And just give us a bit more background, Natacha, and context on what exactly has triggered the protests.
Well, it's all about the fact that the French government is wanting to make a constitutional reform in New Caledonia. What they want to do is make a reform that would allow, that would basically create a situation in which people who've lived in New Caledonia for the past 10 years are eligible to vote in local elections. Now, until now, that hasn't been the case because of some accords that were struck between the French government and the Indigenous Kanak population several decades ago. The French government, though, says, look, it's time to change that because the population is growing and you've got people there who should be allowed to vote in the place in which they live. On the other hand, you've got the Indigenous Kanak population, the pro-independence movement in New Caledonia, saying that changing those voting rights is going to discriminate against the local Kanak population, who are going to become perhaps a minority. They say it's going to favour new arrivals in New Caledonia who come mainly from mainland France. Now, everybody there is a French citizen. It's important to point that out. But the concern is really that the Indigenous Kanak population in some way are going to see their voting rights, their say, their voice diminish. And all of this basically fuels a sentiment that the local population, the Kanak population, have had for many years now, for decades, and that they feel marginalised by the French government in mainland France, that they feel they are second-class citizens. Some say, look, there are parts of the island in which the Kanak population don't even have access to water and electricity. So the French government is saying they are treating everyone in the same way, but certainly there's nobody in mainland France that does not have access to water and electricity.
Okay, Natacha, thank you so much for that reporting from Paris.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.